I love how you're our very own, our fellow Rotarian. With that, I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing Trent because he's coming up to he did his classification talk a couple of years ago. And I'm sure you'll be reminded as he goes through this wonderful slide presentation on the Middle East, focusing on Lebanon and Israel. Come on up, Trent. Thank you so much for volunteering to kick off our adventures.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. First, I have to apologize. I ran out of the house without my hearing aid, so if I seem a little more unresponsive or confused, I can blame it partially on that, so just speak up again. But it's a good thing I'm talking instead of listening right now. Anyway, I started my trip in Lebanon, and take a look at the Lebanese flag there and the tree in the middle, the cedar tree, and I'll get back to that in a minute. Okay, go to the next slide, if you will. And this is the reason why I ended up in the Middle East. It was never on my bucket list. I never in a million years. My wife and I thought about places we would travel, and then I thought about places I'd go. The Middle East was never one of them. But this is my nephew, Andy. He lives in Ireland, and he works for Meta, and he met a woman, Lebanese woman in the company, fell in love, and so they got married, and so we are on the airplane going to Beirut right there. So next slide. The 3 days before the wedding, my nephew's wife, father, and she put together a wonderful tour package. They hired a tour guide and a bus, so the wedding party and dear old uncle and mother could go along, and we went to various places all through Lebanon for 3 days, and that's why I got to see the country. And one of the first places we went were the Cedars of the Gods. And I must admit, I had some assumptions about Lebanon. I should have learned my lesson. I remember when my folks moved to Sequim way back in 1980, and I was in Southern California where I grew up, and I said, well, it's rainy there all the time. And they said, well, yes, in the western part, but there's this eastern part, you know, and I just assumed it was all one thing. And, I assumed that Lebanon was all a desert country, which it is, but it also has some mountainous areas. And it was, at once upon a time, it was very heavily forested with cedar trees. It doesn't have them so much now because of years of cutting them down and reforesting and all that. But this particular area we got to go on was called Cedars of the Gods. And they really are spectacular. They're a little bit different than the trees we have here. It's a much drier climate, but they were pretty spectacular. And go to the next slide. And those are just a couple of the other ones we there. There is Andy's mom, my sister-in-law, Margaret, and she's standing on their trees there. So anyway, next slide. One of the things that my dear daughter said to me, one of the last things, is that she knows I'm not a very adventurous eater. I'm about 73% English, and most of those genes have centered in my taste buds. So where my kids love to eat jalapenos and hot sauce and all that, bell pepper is too spicy for me. So she said, Dad, don't find McDonald's over there. Go and, knock yourself out. And so I made it a point to try to, eat the local cuisine and all that. And the Lebanese food was fantastic. And this was a breakfast that I had at the hotel for a couple of days. And as you can see, they had like beans, they had vegetables, they had bread, they had sesame bread on it. The coffee there was amazing. It's like espresso on steroids. It's almost a solid. And the food there is just fantastic there. So I did venture out of my comfort zone for eating there, I must admit. Okay, next slide. Another assumption I made is that I thought that Lebanon was almost 100% a Muslim country, which it is predominantly Muslim, but it also is about It is, I checked online yesterday, it's about 35, currently it's about 35 to 40% Christian, mostly Catholic. In fact, my nephew converted to Catholicism to marry to my niece-in-law because her family is Catholic. And this is Our Lady of Lebanon, and this is about located in Harissa, which is about 20 miles outside of Beirut. So assumptions that you make, just like I made with Lebanon being all a desert country and being all a country, an Islamic country, it's not all one thing, just like our country is many things. Same thing with Lebanon. So this trip was a good thing for me to open my eyes to a lot of things. Anyway, next slide. I saw so many things. I'm going to focus on the two that I just really was impressed with. This one is Byblos, and it is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. And this is the origination of the Phoenician alphabet originated here many, many, many years ago. I don't know if it's like 4,000, 6,000 years ago. But they have many civilizations from Egyptian, and then they have Parisian, and then the new kids on the block, the Romans, and you can see some of their architecture in a little bit. They came by there. But just to see the excavation there, and then they would say, okay, this was for the Phoenicians, this was 4,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago. And then this was 4,000 years ago. Then this was 2,000 years ago. And it was just inspiring to see that history there and to be able to walk amongst it. It was just breathtaking for me. And then, plus, you get to see the beautiful Mediterranean. Okay, next slide. This one is considered the oldest port in the world, and this has been used for since 3,000 years BC. And they used to import cedars and wines and various things from this port. And this is in Byblos in Lebanon here. And this is part of the original port that's right over here. This part is newer, but anyway. I took those pictures especially for my maritime buddies. I sent those off to them. Okay, next one. And anyway, this is some of the excavation that they did on the grounds in Byblos, and you can go to the next picture. And below there are some of the Roman columns there, and those you'll see later on when we get to my next location, which is Baalbek. You'll see the Roman influence a lot in this part of the world. They laid their mark a lot of places. Okay, next slide. This was really a high point. This gentleman, he runs the Byblos Fossil Museum, and they have fossils of sea animals and plants that are millions of years old. It opened in 1991. And he had his son there that was, I think about 12 or 13. He was just a real kid. And he was following in Daddy's footsteps, and he was kind of giving his birth. I wish I could have I had a little video, but I wasn't quite sure how to incorporate it in it, but he's breaking apart the fossils, and then they open them up. And you could actually purchase the fossils. I bought a couple of fossils that were, I think, a few million years old for my son-in-law, who is really crazy about that stuff. And if you go to the next slide, and these are some of the ones that they found in that area there. That one is, I'm not even sure what kind of fish that is right there, but this is just really amazing. I mean, this is an archaeologist's heaven right here. And that was right on the outskirts of Byblos, right where we were doing the walking around. Okay, next area. Okay, and then the last part, I really love this place. This is Baalbek, and this is in the northern part of Lebanon. And this gentleman, and I'll show you on the next slide in just a minute, you'll see the world's largest rock. And the Romans were carving this rock to go along with their structures that they were building that you'll see in the next few slides. And the people of this area were just basically using this this area where you see this rock as basically their dump site. And this soldier who had retired from the Lebanese army, just was the historical significance, it just broke his heart. So he said, I'm going to buy it and I'm going to basically make it a kind of a tourist spot. And so anyway, go to the next one. And so this is what Romans were working on, and I believe they ended up losing power about this time, and so they left the rock there. So anyway, go to the next slide. And then we went a little ways out from where that rock was to the ruins of Baalbek. And these are ruins from the ancient Roman times that date back about 2,000 years, 2,100 years or so. And the restoration of this began in about 1899. Emperor Wilhelm from Germany, he and his wife toured through Lebanon at that time, and they said, this is really amazing. And so they sent an archaeology team to start to uncover it. And then a little thing called World War I got in the way, and then they stopped it. And then the French took over a little bit later on after that. And go into the next slide. And this was our tour guide. Her name was Irene, and she was just wonderful. She's just full of energy. I don't know where these tour guides get it, but they're just amazing. She was, anyway, she's showing some of the writing there that you can still see. That's over 2,000 years old. Go to the next slide. There were two temples there. There's a Bacchus and the Jupiter temple that you can see. And then go to the next one. And this one, I actually was standing under the archway of one of the temples, and you can see the intricate carvings that they have here. And then here, this was a swimming pool that they have there, or a bath, or whatever you would call it. And then even after 2,000 years, how they were able to hold up. And they must have had just some great unions there. And, I'm sure the slaves were very, very happy. The intricacy that they were able to do that. And then, okay, go to the next one. And then this again was the reason why I'm there. And then this is Andy and Sabrina. This is his wife, Sabrina, and his best man, Kyle. And it was just a really beautiful, beautiful wedding. They had it in the family's church that I guess they've attended to for forever and ever. That was about 300 years old. And then at the reception, they made their entrance there. You can barely see Sabrina and Andy, and they are surrounded by Lebanese dancers, and they are playing drums, and they are doing backflips all around them. And it was just really a joyous occasion. And it was just really a wonderful, happy time to be part of. So that is why I came to Lebanon. Anyway, next slide. And then the last day I was there, there was a mall right across from my hotel room. So I ventured over there. And I saw this was kind of interesting, realizing I was in a little different part of the world. They had restrooms, and then they also had prayer rooms over there. And I thought that was kind of cool and also interesting that they have designated areas for prayer as well as restrooms. And then, what will I know about the Muslim religion? I said, yeah, of course they would have that. So I thought that was neat that they had a designated spot. And this was about the time of Barbie mania. And so I had to take a picture of that for my granddaughters to show that, yes, indeed, Barbie was taking over the world at that time. So, anyway. Okay, so on to Israel. So the next slide. This is my tour group. And this was just a wonderful group of people that we went with. They were people from Singapore and Australia and Cuba, and of course, America. And this man, Evan, was our tour guide, and I'll talk about him a little bit later on. Okay, next slide. The first place we went was very, very profound and very sad, but very important to go to. It's Yad Vashem, which is the World Holocaust Remembrance Center. And in the museum itself, you can't take pictures, so I don't, of course, take pictures, but I was able to take pictures of this one, which is called the Hall of Remembrance. And these are names of some of the concentration camps. And then they have ashes of people that perished in them. And then this eternal flame burns constantly for them. But the museum itself is very powerful the way that it is structured, where it is you are basically weaved through where you entrance. At the entrance, you go through and you see pictures and films of families in their everyday life, waving through the kids, they go to school and things like that. And then as you work your way through, you start to see documentation and films and pictures of how the Nazis and Hitler's systematically started to take away their rights and then got progressively worse and worse and worse, and how you go through that whole horror. And then at the very end, how they were liberated, and eventually at the end, but at the end, you can kind of see at the end, you see this light, and you're kind of constantly weaving your way towards the light, and it's extremely powerful. But anyway, the next slide. One of the things that we were able to take a picture of, this was a children's memorial, and some Holocaust victims, a husband and wife that did survive, are not victims, well, they were subject to it, but they did survive the Holocaust. Unfortunately, their little boy did not. But after the Holocaust, they moved to LA, and then they I think made quite a bit of money in the movie business, and they took a big chunk of their money, and they built a memorial for all the children that perished in the Holocaust. And so this was a thing, that was a picture of the little boy there, and that was quite powerful. Okay, next one. And then we went to the Church of Nativity, which is the site where they consider this as Jesus's birthplace. And then over the years, over the centuries, they've had churches built upon churches and all that. And this is quite a popular place, as you can imagine. This woman took over for us. She was kind of specialized in, or she kind of took over for Evan, our tour guide. And so she kind of shepherded us through this particular site. One of the things she said was, which was unfortunately turned out to be not so true. She said, "How many of you had family members and friends that were worried about you traveling to the Middle East, or worried about traveling to Israel?" And I raised my hand along with a couple other people, and I said, "Well, yeah, my kids and my best friend were, my best friend said, 'Damn, Trent, and my friend's a world traveler,' and he said, 'For your first international travel, you're going to the Middle East?'" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, okay." But, they were, and she said, "Well, come, it's, and I did not feel unsafe really at any time. Maybe I was being foolish, but I didn't. Of course, I was part of tour groups and things like that. But she said, "Tell people that they're welcome here. This is a safe place," and all that. Unfortunately, a few weeks later, we know what happened. But it was interesting that Bethlehem, which is, of course, where the Church of Nativity is in Palestine. So we had to travel outside of Jerusalem to get to Palestine. And our tour guide was Evan was rather nervous. And he said, "Make sure you have your passport on you. Everybody in the tour, make sure you have it on you." So we, had it in our duffel bags and all that. And sure enough, we got to the checkpoint, and we had two soldiers that entered the bus. And there was one woman who was maybe 5 foot, and she probably could have killed me with one finger. And then we had one very big man with a very big gun behind her, and they were looking very stern at all of our passports. And then they got off the bus, and then we were allowed to go on. And so, we kind of knew it was serious business, but I didn't feel unsafe at any time. And I'm sure it was because I was sheltered by a very good tour, but it was sometimes you have to take risks, and I did. Anyway, next slide. Nope, back there anyway. And so when you get into the church, you're kind of going to this grotto, and there are just hundreds and hundreds of people that squeeze down into this little hole, basically underground. And then this is where they think that scholars believe, and that this is where Jesus was buried. And so you can see that
born or buried?
Not born, excuse me. Thank you. Yeah, that is where they believe that Jesus was born. I really like this picture, and this one depicts the Virgin Mary and Jesus, and how he is viewed in the Middle East. And as you can see, he does not look like Brad Pitt. And I thought that was pretty cool, because being born from that region, he probably did not look like Brad Pitt. And so I thought that would be really Cool. Anyway, next slide. The next day we went to the Mount of Olives, and this gives you a really good idea. This is Jerusalem in the background, and this is Old Jerusalem over here. And this gives you really a good idea of how Islam and Jewish religion and Christianity all meld together in this very, very small space, where this area is where Jesus spent the last days of his life. Garden of Gethsemane is, I believe, over there. This is a Dome on the Rock, which is one of the most important and symbolic mosque in the Muslim world. And then they have the Wailing Wall, which over there, which we were allowed to visit for Jewish religion. And also this is one of the most important Jewish cemeteries that's right down there. And they have prime ministers, I think Golda Meir and I think Malcolm Reagan are buried there. And so in this whole area, you have three big religions that are all together, and they call Jerusalem in this part of the world home, and it's very symbolic to them. And so you can see why the passion and why a lot of times there can be a lot of conflict there is because this part of the world is very, very important to them, not only geographically, but for spiritually and for their religion. Anyway, if you go to the next slide, and this just gives you a little bit closer picture of that. And I was able to, National Geographic, see some pictures on the inside of the mosque. Unfortunately, we weren't able to go in there because we weren't Muslim, so I wasn't able to do that. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And that was greeting us at the bus. And so I got to see a camel and made my granddaughter very, very happy. I bought her a stuffed one. Okay, next one. And we went to Masada. I'm running, I think, a little short on time, so I'm going to kind of go through this really quickly. If you go to the next one, this was basically a temple that was built on a plateau by King Herod. And these frescoes, I will just briefly talk about. This is really fascinating because these are part of the Herod's time, which is over 2,000 years old, and these are the original ones, and then these are things that they built later on. And so how archaeologists are able to preserve them and all that, it was just amazing that you're walking around this history at this time and to say, you know, you of course don't touch it, but you're just walking around it. It's just fascinating. So anyway, next one. And that was part of the bathhouse that I think they have points on that. Okay, next one. Okay, that's the outside, and then next picture. And then if you see on the distance, that is the Dead Sea. So let's get to the Dead Sea. And there I am floating. And the Dead Sea is about 10 times greater salinity, has more salt than the ocean. It's about 34%. And so what you do is you basically, our tour guide said, you walk back and then you just sit down and you just float. You don't, and he said, whatever you don't get it in your mouth and certainly don't get it in your eyes. And then when you're ready to get out, you just kind of swim up until the bottom and then do a sit up and then you get up. And you get out and you feel like you're covered in baby oil. That's it. And it's really neat. It's the lowest part on Earth. And it was interesting. They had a bar right on the shores of it that's called the lowest bar on Earth. And so needless to say, there are lots of T-shirts and mugs and shot glasses you can get there. And so that was really a treat. And anyway, okay, next slide. That is our tour guide, Evan. And so we ended up going and doing the Stations of the Cross, which is a path that Jesus took on his road to his crucifixion. And it's about a half a mile. And so Evan was just amazing. You know, he was funny. He was crazy smart. He knew tons about history, tons about religion. He spoke 3 or 4 languages fluently. And he said, oh, I'm working on Arabic right now. And yeah, and I said, you know, You should be a kindergarten teacher with all your energy. Anyway, go ahead, the next slide, and then we'll go on to the next one. Okay, and then the next day we got to go in the Sea of Galilee. That was my hotel room, shot from my hotel room. How am I doing on time, Carmen?
I get like 3 or 4 minutes.
3, 4 minutes? Okay, that's outside my, okay, anyway, I had a beautiful view. We took a nice, beautiful morning boat ride out there, and it was a very meaningful trip for, although our tour was not for necessarily religious, some tours are for religious groups, and ours was not necessarily that. A lot of people on tour went there for religious and spiritual reasons, obviously, and this was a very powerful trip for them. But it was just a beautiful boat ride and very meaningful and very peaceful. And then the next slide. And then a dance party broke out. And there's Evan dancing with our dear Cuban grandmother to George Michael's Wake Me Up Before You Go. Okay, go on to the next slide. And again, I became more of an adventurous eater. I learned how to eat fish with the head on. And as my buddy was saying, I was enjoying a Hebrew there. Okay, next slide. The Mount of Beatitudes, that was really powerful and meaningful to me, although I'm not a particularly devout churchgoer, or I have my own beliefs and all that, but the Sermon on the Mount was something that always resonated with me. If you go to the next slide, they had the Beatitudes from the Sermon on the Mount. They had them on these plaques as you were walking up to the church, and they were I thought this was beautiful. And whether it ties in with your religious and spiritual beliefs, or whether you just think that they're good words to live by, I thought that also is what we strive for in Rotary. And so I thought that was really a beautiful thing. And the next slide, we get to the church at the top there, and you can go to the next one. I did get a chance to go to kibbutz, and I will just briefly say it was interesting. This gentleman here did say something that really stuck with me after the attacks. He said that the kibbutz is basically kind of like a commune. They do agriculture, they had vineyards, they had crafts, and they had things like that. And it's not exactly a whole socialist thing where they pool all their money, but it's kind of it's more of a commune kind of feel, of community living kind of thing where the families pool together. And he said, this gentleman, he says, I'm not a fan of the current political leadership in our country, which, is Netanyahu and all that. And I kind of thought, well, yeah, you guys are the commune. You probably would not be in favor of more conservative government and all that. And then when the attack happened, when I did see the news, my first thought, and I thought, I did see the kibbutz that they attacked, and it looked similar to this one. And I said, was that the one that I visited? And I got online, and it wasn't. But I thought, the people that they are attacking are the very people that are very sympathetic to and are not in agreement necessarily with a very hardcore right-wing philosophy there. And so it's really a heartbreaking situation that happened. So anyway, I'm glad that I got a chance to visit it. It was one of the things that I didn't really think about much when I went there, and I'm so glad I did get a chance there. Okay, you can go to the next one and the next one. Knights Hall, go to the next slide. This was fantastic, whether you go to the Middle East for the spiritual reasons or whether you go for historic reasons. The Knights Hall had artifacts from all different kinds of periods of time. And for instance, this one was from the Phoenician period, that's like 1200 BC, and they had an artifact, and you can go to the next slide. Byzantine period, next slide. And then I end up in Tel Aviv, and our tour guide said, people go to Jerusalem to pray, and they go to Tel Aviv to play. And boy, Tel Aviv was beautiful. And I absolutely fell in love with the Mediterranean Sea, and I could swim in it all day. And so that was a beautiful way, a wonderful way of ending the trip. And anyway, I just felt so, yeah, especially now that what has happened, I feel so blessed and grateful that I got a chance to see the Middle East the way that I did, because I don't think that a lot of people are going to get a chance to see it that way for a whole lot of years. And so I fell in love with both countries. Good, loving people that are very proud of their countries. There is a lot of anger and a lot of hurt and a lot of history between them. Lebanon, when I was in Lebanon, they were not happy. The few people I told when I said, well, I'm going to go to Israel next. So my cover story was, well, I'm going to Turkey, which was true. I had to go to Turkey for 5 hours because he wouldn't let me fly directly to Israel. But there is, both countries, they are really good people. They have a lot of love and pride for their country. And I hope after all this horrible stuff ends that maybe some good can come, but we can only hope. Anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Question for Trent.
Yep.
All right. I didn't catch when you went to these countries.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. What years were you there?
I'm sorry, my hearing aids are up.
When were you there?
I was there in September of this last year.
Okay.
Yeah, I came back 2 weeks before the attack happened. Good. So,
Any other questions?